From LPM,
Louisville Public Media.
Support comes from Vision Zero. On foot or behind the wheel, safety is a shared responsibility. And Vision Zero Louisville believes 0 roadway fatalities is the only acceptable amount. Their mission is to create safe roads by design, engineering solutions, and education. More information at visionzerolouisville.org.
Welcome to Race Unwrapped. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson. On this episode, we're talking to Karen Short, Director of Legal and Research for the National League of Women Voters. Even though it's called the League of Women Voters, they actually work to make sure that all voters have a safe passage to participate in local and national elections, especially voters of color who are more likely to have more hurdles to clear.
The League of Women Voters is more than a century old. We were created during the quest for the 19th Amendment, for enfranchisement of, let's be honest, white women. Mm-hmm. And we now have state and local leagues in every state, including DC, and members all over the country. Nearly 800 local leagues around the country. There's one in every community. And our mission is fairly simple: to defend democracy and empower voters. And it's a very broad mission. We focus on encouraging active participation in our political process. That doesn't just mean voting. That means getting involved at your school board, getting involved in county commissions and city council issues, getting involved in state legislative issues, and of course, being involved in issues on the federal level. But we know that so many things happen that impact people's daily lives on the local and state level. And so that is why it's so critical that we have these local and state leagues working in communities on the ground every day.
So one of the things that's always impressed me about the League of Women Voters is that you're nonpartisan, correct?
Absolutely.
And why do you think that's important?
Because voting is not a partisan issue. At least it shouldn't be. The League focuses on ensuring that everyone can participate in our democracy. We don't care who you vote for. We just want you to vote. We want you to participate. We want you to encourage your community, your friends, your relatives to get out and vote, to participate in the electoral process, to participate in the democratic processes, to be involved in your community, and to focus on issues that are important for you. Now, the League does support certain issues and positions, but we, of course, do not support any specific candidates ever.
Right. Do you just focus on women voters?
Absolutely not. It is developed out of the women's suffrage movement, but we have members of every gender, of every race, of every background from communities across the country. And our focus is encouraging everyone to get involved. But we also believe in the power of women, and believe that women do power democracy. And so that is where we harness our greatest strength, is through women.
God bless you. So here's my thing. What do you see as the big issue when it comes to voter suppression, and how does your organization try to address it? And when I say voter suppression, typically when people hear voter suppression, they're talking about race. Mm-hmm. Do you think that's still the case?
Absolutely. The central issue in voting and access to the ballot has always been and continues to be race. There are efforts around the country, particularly in the Deep South and states that were previously covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, specifically targeting, even if it doesn't say it on the face, the political power of Black Americans. That has been a theme of our voting rights struggle. And the fight for voting rights for Black Americans has resulted in more equity in access to the ballot for everyone. It is still the central issue, I believe, in voting. we focus on a number of issues. We want to dismantle barriers to the ballot, barriers to political participation for everyone. But because so much of the targeting of these laws focuses on laws and policies that either have the intent or the effect of creating barriers or preventing Black Americans from getting to the ballot box, voting, having their vote counted, and participating in the political process, a lot of our work is focused on these specific barriers, particularly here in the Deep South, where I am, in Georgia. But also we find that so many of these issues are intersectional. If there's a law that is targeting or impacting voters with disabilities, that is also going to disproportionately affect Black voters and other voters of color. And we want to lift all boats here. And so when we focus, particularly in the voting rights legal community, on issues that affect Black voters, other voters of color, we find that we are increasing access to the ballot and access to political representation for everyone, which is really what we're aiming for.
Absolutely. It reminds me of a saying, and I may be misremembering it, but it's when America gets a cold, Black America gets pneumonia.
100%.
And that is why no matter what expert I talk to, regardless of what race they are, like, for example, since, listeners won't be able to see you, you're a white woman, regardless of the race or the gender of the person I'm talking to, it all seems to get back to the American history of trying to suppress the Black vote, which then negatively affects anybody who is even adjacent to Blackness, whether it's you're another minority or you're a poor white person. And would you say that that's a fair observation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in fact, post-Reconstruction, when the Southern states were sort of reestablishing their constitutions, and the federal government had left them to their own devices, most of the state constitutions around 1890, 1901 were explicitly designed. Laws that they passed were explicitly and expressly designed to prohibit, at that time, Black men from gaining any political power, access to the ballot. They said it out loud. They said the quiet part out loud back then.
Yeah.
They're better at that now, not doing that now. Mm-hmm. But the effect is still the same. And in fact, we still have laws that are either remnants of those constitutions. For example, felony disenfranchisement laws were all originally designed to disenfranchise Black men. They still have that effect today. But all of these laws are cousins, are grandchildren of these original racially discriminatory laws, poll taxes, literacy tests, all of these devices were specifically designed. And that's why a lot of commentators and voting rights experts are calling what's happening now, Jim Crow 2.0, because it is. These laws are designed to disenfranchise Black voters, other voters of color, which, as you mentioned, then sweeps up often young voters, older voters, people without access to some of the resources, low-income voters, certainly, and voters with disabilities. And it's incredibly unfortunate.
Well, Karen, I just am fascinated how also all the people who are working in voting are making the same connections that I thought of, which is that so many of these laws today are descendants of the laws right after the civil rights era, when the prospect of a Black man, since Black women, no woman was voting, but of Black men voting was just like the worst thing that could happen. And it's just crazy to think that in 2024, that's still a legacy that how many groups, how many people are still trying to fight and battle. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that it's still around?
Mm-hmm.
Because of political power, because staying in power, achieving political power, has always been the goal. And, when I mentioned those early constitutions, I'm thinking of the 1890 Constitution from Mississippi, the 1901 Constitution in Alabama. They explicitly said the purpose of this Constitution is, and I'm paraphrasing, to maintain, establish white supremacy in the state, period. They said it. And it really is just an extension. It's trying to maintain political power for those who have always been in power. And that's white men and the interests of white men, and allowing voters of color, Black men, Black women, Black people, other voters of color, more diverse populations of voters from different walks of life to participate gravely threatens that political power of white men. And as we've seen, even prior to 2016, everybody knows that this nation is quickly becoming a majority minority nation. Yeah. Soon, white people will not be the largest group in this country. And that is frightening to some people because that means that their political power and their established power in all the places where power matters is threatened. And so they are doing absolutely everything they can at every turn to secure that political power. We hope that it's a losing battle. We believe that the winds of change are moving to a more inclusive democracy. But sometimes we have to take legal action and other actions to move it along and to prevent people's rights from being denied.
And it's funny because, as you probably know from what you've seen, observed, talked to people about, so many people try to gaslight Black people and other people of color into going, but racism doesn't exist and we've dealt with all those problems. Well, if that's the case, why are you worried about a majority minority? If it's
let everybody vote.
Right. If it's all good in the hood, then let's let everybody vote and let it fall out. But, for some reason, there seems to be a contradiction that takes place. You mentioned some of the ways that voter suppression can be addressed. What are some of the tactics that the League of Women Voters is particularly supportive of?
The League approaches this mission, our mission, from all angles. So I manage our federal litigation, which is happening all over the country, and I'm happy to go more into that. But litigation is often a last resort. We don't want to have to get to the point where we litigate. And so our leagues across the country, including the National League, are, in the corridors of legislatures, of Congress, at city councils, advocating for the issues that matter to them and to their community to prevent the situation where we have to go to court. So a great example is our People-Powered Fair Maps program, which relates to redistricting. The National League and all of our local leagues and state leagues work together to ensure fair redistricting every 10 years. So we did it this last term, this last cycle, and secured fair maps in a number of communities. Those are maps and communities where we don't have to go in and litigate and, spend a lot of money and time and effort just to get what is constitutionally or federally required of these maps. And so we're working on advocating with election officials, with government officials, to make sure that laws comply. Laws that are passed and policies that are passed comply with state and federal law, with all of the voting rights protections. And then if necessary, we will go to court.
Yeah. Well, the League of Women Voters is, I won't say what the acronym says, but a BFD. And one of the reasons is I know that you have a lot of members. About how many people, I know you said 800 local chapters, but how many people are in the league?
We have over 500,000 members and supporters.
Oh, wow. And I'm sorry, I wasn't trying to quiz you, but I know you help millions of people.
Yes, and we track the number of voters that we contact, residents that we contact, voters that we're able to reach, voters that we protect through our litigation. So we're tracking that as well. We have between 750 and 800 local leagues, and that number also includes our state leagues in all 50 states. I believe in the last fiscal year, we protected over 10 million voters through our litigation. We've contacted millions more. We registered nearly 200,000 voters across the country. That was in part through our work on naturalization ceremonies in various communities. Leagues will help register people who have just become U.S. citizens, which is a very exciting program for anyone who participates. That program registered 37,000 new voters.
Wow.
And worked at, I believe, 800 naturalization ceremonies. We also register tens of thousands of young voters through our high school and community college programs. And we've also registered about 30,000 people through digital outreach and digital means.
We're going to take a quick break and we'll be right back with more from Karen Short. This is Race Unwrapped. Welcome back to Race Unwrapped. Our guest today is Karen Short, Director of Legal and Research with the National League of Women Voters. So what I want to know is there a particular tactic or area of voting that you think most needs your attention, your focus in these next few months?
Obviously, everyone is very focused on the presidential election, but one message that we try to consistently share, both at the National League and throughout all of our leagues and our members, is how critical local elections are. There's going to be something other than president on your ballot in November. Many states have statewide elections that are critical. Some states have judicial elections, sheriff elections. These are folks who have direct impact on your daily life. Frankly, a lot more than the president, or the same, if not more, impact on your daily life. And there are so many ramifications for not voting locally and then not staying in the loop. We have so many states where many offices will go, many candidates will be unopposed. There's no real competition. And so that's a message that we really push, and that is why our leagues are so critical on the ground, because they have the knowledge. Who's on your ballot? What do they stand for? And our program, our website, vote411.org, is one of the most incredible resources for voters in every community. You can go and click on your state. You can click on where you're located and find out who's running, if they've shared their positions on issues. You can download a sample ballot, and you have everything that you need for your election.
Man, that's amazing. I mean, you have a great website. I mean, so many of you.
Thank you.
I feel like the organizations that focus on voting have some of the most impressive websites and resource sharing that I've seen compared to other issues. So many people are having, we talk about this in the news business, news fatigue and election fatigue. How do you all kind of cut through the noise and combat that?
It's a very important question. It is hard work. I can't imagine how tired everyone is. Just thinking about elections all the time and the state of our country. It's really important that we at the league meet people where they are when we're out in the community and talking to people, find out what issues are important to them, make sure that they feel empowered and have what they need to vote. One thing that really energizes me and I think my colleagues, is this newer generation of young voters. I mean, I know there's a lot of narrative about how young people just don't vote. I don't think that's true for this generation. I think that my generation, the generations after me, which I think there are two now after me, not to date myself, are incredibly politically involved. They care very much. They interact with each other about issues. And young voters are going to have so much impact on these elections at every level, president all the way down. They're ready to make their voices heard.
And you know, that's the other thing. I mean, like everybody, I've heard that about younger voters too, right? And trust me, if you've got a couple of generations below you, I've got then 4 or 5 below me. And since the emphasis of this podcast in general and this season in particular is on race, do you have any observations about how race is playing out in terms of getting more voters, getting people who don't like to vote or who aren't conditioned to vote to vote? I mean, any observations you're making?
I think that, as you're alluding to, apathy among voters is real. I think that it's, in my opinion, sometimes more likely for younger voters to be hyper aware of what's happening and feel a little less powerful in the political process. But that's why it's so critical that younger voters are aware about what impacts them, what they care about, and who decides those issues. And that goes back again, not to repeat myself, but to local elections, to statewide elections, to young folks and their communities really rallying around issues that matter to them. One example is student debt. It's a huge issue for my generation, for the generations after me, and it will be continuing. This is an issue that I think that young people are really mobilized around. And they realize that if they don't get involved, nothing will change. And so I think that young voters are really powerful in that they have connections to their communities. They can determine what's going to be at issue now and in the future. And when they vote together, it can be very powerful and really influence elections.
I agree, and I can really see that, which, leads to sort of how I want to end this conversation, because I want the conversations I have about voting not just to be about how bad things are and how difficult things are, but what are ways that voter suppression, to be blunt, can be battled. Like, how do we get more people to vote? How do other groups eliminate the barriers that stand between the ballot box and people who want to vote?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree that the message, particularly in an election year, needs to remind people that they have so much power in their vote. If your vote wasn't so powerful, nobody would be trying to suppress it so much. Right?
Say that. Right.
So that's what we remind people. And I think the younger generation is getting that. They're seeing the threat of a very popular media platform that they use to communicate ideas be threatened, maybe because of the political power that is developing and creating in the younger generation. So they see how powerful their voices are. I think that one critical point is that people and legislators and lawmakers need to be working all together on every level to make voting an accessible, simple process for everyone who is eligible. That's unfortunately not happening in a lot of states. It is happening in other states that support voters, that want everyone to have access. The Brennan Center reports regularly on the state of voting, and they track the suppressive laws and the expansive laws that have been passed. There are always dozens of pro-voter, pro-democracy laws that are passed in many states to expand access to the ballot. We saw that as a necessity during the height of COVID in 2020. A lot of states were expanding access to absentee ballots, drop boxes, early voting. Many of those reforms have stuck because people see how helpful it is for people to have more access, and also how helpful it is for election officials to not have to have everybody come on election day. So there are many reasons to be hopeful, but we also need to hold our elected officials accountable. Congress must restore the Voting Rights Act and pass the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act. The devastation that has come from losing the protections of Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act here in the Deep South and other places that were previously covered has been monumental. And voters, particularly Black voters and other voters of color, are still climbing over those barriers, finding a way to vote despite these barriers that are placed in front of them. That doesn't mean the barriers should still exist. That doesn't mean we don't fight to take down these barriers and make it more accessible. The Brennan Center also recently did a report about voter turnout since the Shelby County decision. And voter turnout has actually decreased in the Black community, particularly in states that were previously covered by Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. And the voters that I interact with, the people that I've interacted with in my career down here in the South, are the most energized, active, community-focused voters and organizers. And the fact that even with all of that organizing in places that birthed the Voting Rights Act, Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, the fact that the voter turnout is still going down really speaks to the devastating effects of these laws and how successful they are. But the resilience of voters is something that carries me every single day. We see it in our league members. We see it in our coalition partners. They will do whatever it takes to vote, but that means we as advocates and our lawmakers must break down these barriers so they don't have to fight so hard.
Big thanks to Karen Short from the National League of Women Voters. Next time, we'll talk to Selene Gomez with an organization called Vote Riders. Their mission is to make sure people have the proper ID in the states where you need it to vote. I'm Michelle Tyreen Johnson, and this is Race Unwrapped.
Race Unwrapped is produced by Michelle Tyreen Johnson for Louisville Public Media. Alex Biscardi is our audio engineer. Music by Allison Cross. Our executive producer is Laura Ellis. For more information, to contact us, or to support Race Unwrapped, visit raceunwrapped.org.